The answer is Putin's already lost the war.
I'm wearing my Ukraine tie, my Ukraine pin, which I've been wearing because they're in dire straits right now, defending themselves against a Russian onslaught.
War is a reality test. The Russia-Ukraine-NATO war has thrown up some real surprises. Surprises that reveal difficult truths about history and geopolitics, about the fate of the West and liberal democracy. So writes Emmanuel Todd in his stunning new book, The Defeat of the West. And what is the reality exposed by the truths, the surprising truths of the Russia-Ukraine-NATO war, all the horrors and the tragedies of that war. Todd argues it shatters all the illusions, the statistical illusions, the historical myths, the comforting political ideologies, the propaganda, the conspiracy theories, the fake and convenient news. It shatters all those things and presents us with some revelations about how history is really unfolding. So in that unfolding of the surprising facts of the Russia-Ukraine war, do we see the defeat of the West? Let's explore Emmanuel Todd's The Defeat of the West. Now, Defeat of the West is a complex book, and I'm just going to really introduce you to it today and talk about the sort of opening section of the book. I will do some videos soon on some of the big ideas in the book. Ideas like we're now living in a liberal oligarchy, not a liberal democracy. So do hit the subscribe button now, share and like this video if you'd like to see more of those things. And who is Emmanuel Todd and why should we pay attention to him? Well, Emmanuel Todd is an historian. He is often called other things, an intellectual after the French tradition of Foucault and Derrida and co. But that's a misleading label. He's sometimes called a demographer or an anthropologist, but in this book he calls himself the last historian in the Annales School of France. This is the tradition of French history that focused on the longue durée, long periods of time, and the fundamental social processes that occurred over time, like changes in bread prices or changes in family systems that lead to changes in collective attitudes, in collective mentalities. That's the tradition Emmanuel Todd is working in, and understanding that is really important to understanding his book, The Defeat of the West, because he looks at current events and tries to see how they fit into that longue durée of shaping collective mentalities, shaping mentalities that may have contributed to the outcomes of the conflicts between Russia and the West, America and the rest of the world. Famously, Emmanuel Todd predicted the fall of the Soviet Union in the early to mid-1970s on the basis of his work on family systems. He discerned a fall in infant mortality in the Soviet Union, which suggested to him that it had an unsustainable social structure. And interestingly, he points out that today the United States of America has a higher infant mortality rate, that is a higher number of children under 2 years of age who die than Russia. And he has been a very significant historian and intellectual in France, but he has also been a brave voice within France, somewhat like John Mearsheimer has been in America, in making the observation that the war was not going according to the West, America's or NATO's plans or Ukraine's plans, that it seemed that that Russia was winning the war, and he has, if you like, gone for a deeper explanation and account of that in this book, The Defeat of the West. He opens the book with 10 surprises about the Russia-Ukraine war, and these are really interesting because they're not necessarily controversial arguments or big, deep interpretations of history. They are observations about things that perhaps he did not expect, or that the leaders of the West did not expect, or the leaders of Russia did not expect, but that have played out in events and perhaps require deeper historical explanation than the kind of thing you might get in a discussion of how a battle in eastern Ukraine is going today. So I'm going to quickly run through these 10 surprises as a great introduction to the kind of thinking that is in Emmanuel Todd's book, and then I'm going to point out at the end of the video where you can go to dig a little bit deeper. Okay, surprise number 1 is that war erupted in Europe. Europe had told itself that war no longer happened in Europe. War was something that happened in Afghanistan, in the poor countries of Africa, in the rest of the world. But in this war, suddenly Europe and the West, NATO and America as Europe's key strategic partner, were confronted with the largest war in Europe since World War II. Surprise number 2 was that this war was not breaking out against China, that the US had for years across the political spectrum in America been declaring as its key adversary or its key strategic competitor. But this war was breaking out against the old foe of Russia. The third surprise that Emmanuel Todd makes an observation on is one that many people have commented on, that in the early days of the war from February 2022, there was strong and perhaps surprising resilience and military resistance in Ukraine. Now, Emmanuel Todd doesn't discuss the military tactics of that. What he comments on is that tells us something about Ukrainian society, that Ukrainian society genuinely had a character and an independence and a resistance, I guess, or was a stronger state than perhaps the Russian intelligence services, the Russian leaders might have initially planned for. And he explores the reasons for that, some of the deeper social reasons for why Ukrainian society has developed in the way it has further on in the book. The fourth surprise is that there was also a surprise for the West in the early days of the war. The expectation was that the ruble would be rubble, that the sanctions from hell would destroy the Russian economy and force a collapse of the Russian political regime. But in fact, the Russian economy was much more resistant. And this was a very important surprise, and Emmanuel Todd explains the significance of this, that it revealed that there was a much more flexible economy in Russia than Western leaders had imagined, and perhaps an economy that was better serving the needs of the society and the state, at least if it wants to conduct a war. Its manufacturing and industrial capacity was much more than expected and much greater than the West. The fifth surprise Emmanuel Todd describes in Defeat of the West is the subservience of Europe to America. And he contrasts this to the situation in the early 2000s when the Iraq War happened. In the early 2000s, the Iraq War broke out, and it was strong. The American intervention in Iraq and our British and Australian and other allies, their intervention was strongly resisted by both France and Germany within the European Union. This did not happen this time, and it suggests to Emmanuel Todd that something has happened in the capacity of the European state that requires stronger explanation, but also perhaps that the relationship between America and Europe has developed in a way where there is more of what he calls a kind of a post-imperial attitude in America. It calls the shots for Europe. They do not talk to each other as sovereign allies, and that in it turn was part of the issue with Russia, because Russia would not accept that. The sixth surprise identified by Emmanuel Todd is the bellicosity of Britain. And here I might just quote from my translation of his work, because The Defeat of the West has not yet been published in English, but you can read it in French and do your best with Google Translate. So he says, the sixth surprise of the war was the emergence of the United Kingdom as an anti-Russian rocket and a fly in the ointment of NATO. Relayed by the Western press, its Ministry of Defence immediately appeared as one of the most excited commentators of the war conflict, to the point of making American neoconservatives look like lukewarm militarists. The United Kingdom wanted to be the first to send long-range missiles and heavy tanks to Ukraine. You have to understand too that Emmanuel Todd's principal speciality is in demography, and he's long argued that I guess the Anglo-American liberal world has a distinct ethos which in part derives, not directly but through indirect effects, from the nature of its family systems. And that leads to his next point, which is the seventh surprise, that another set of Protestant countries were also bellicose nations and quickly abandoned long traditions of neutrality to join NATO. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and they all revealed a more aggressive attitude towards Russia. The eighth and very significant surprise of the war is the weakness of the Western military-industrial complex, not just the army and the air force and the navy, but all of the industry that supplies those armed forces, the manufacture of weapons and missiles and artillery shells, critically. And what was revealed even by the American and British and NATO forces themselves was that their industrial capacity simply wasn't up to meeting the Ukraine's war supply needs. This was especially surprising because Russia, on nominal GDP terms, is only a small percentage of the total economy of the European Union and the United States of America. It's only it's about 20 or less percent of the population of those combined entities. Yet, he writes, these 3.3% capable of producing more weapons than the Western world. And this posed two problems. First, for the Ukrainian army, because they were losing the war and are still losing the war, in terms of material resources. Increasingly, people report that Ukraine might run out of ammunition within a month. But it also revealed a major problem, he says, to the queen science of the West, political economy or economics, whose, dare we say the word, bogus character is thus revealed to the world. The concept of gross domestic product is outdated, and we now must reflect on the relationship of neoliberal political economy to reality. Interestingly, the very distinguished economic historian, economist historian, Adam Tooze has made a similar point. He has said that the value of using nominal gross domestic product is simply outdated. People need to come to terms with all the imperfections. The purchasing power parity measure is a much better one. The ninth surprise was the ideological solitude of the West and the ignorance it had of its own isolation. The West, in those early months of 2022, attempted to cancel Russia and expected the whole world to, galvanize behind it, to diplomatically isolate Russia, to culturally isolate and cancel Russia. But that did not happen. The BRICS nations, I guess, stood with Russia, or at least took a neutral position, and increasingly around the world there are strong diplomatic connections with Russia. And it has taken a very long time for leaders of the West to slowly come to terms with the fact that they have not won this war diplomatically. And that leads us to the 10th and final surprise. And let me read. He says, the 10th and final surprise is about to materialize. This is the defeat of the West, the title of the book. We will be surprised by such an assertion when the war is not over. It's still ongoing, yet increasingly people are saying the West has lost. But this defeat is a certainty because the West self-destructs rather than being attacked by Russia. It's a very rich book, and I've only just given you a brief introduction to show you some of the intriguing questions that these observations, these surprising facts of the Russia-Ukraine war revealed to Emmanuel Todd. And there are some fascinating ideas that he then develops in the rest of the book about the deeper causes of that, the deeper causes related to religion, to the nature of whether we still live in liberal democracies or whether we live in liberal oligarchies, and the attitudes of superiority in the West towards Russia, but to many other nations in the world, presumably including China, that have led to a catastrophic fall. Pride, let alone vanity, they say, comes before a fall. And I'm going to do some further videos on some of the intriguing ideas in Emmanuel Todd's book, The Defeat of the West. So why not subscribe to my channel, give this video a like, and you'll be notified of those videos. Why not also check out this video I did about a year ago, which explored some of Emmanuel Todd's early ideas on the war in Ukraine.